Mission, let's take a listen.
Observers noted that most polling units opened on time with materials.
My people, good morning. My name is Stephen TV. Guys, when I watch this video, when I watch this interview, the press release by UN observers in this 2023 general election. Guys, when I watch what the observers, UE observers, what they said concerning the election, all the things that they have found out about the election, the proceedings, and just all the information. They want just listen to the video and hear what they have to say. Guys, thank you. Don't forget to like, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you, guys.
Mission, let's take a listen.
Observers noted that most polling units opened on time, with materials present and election officials ready to serve the voter. However, there was less pressure on INEC operations throughout the day, owing to a dismal level of voter participation. Vote buying, also directly observed by EU EOM observers, further detracted from an appropriate conduct of the election in many places. The use of election technology was more efficient this time around. By midday yesterday, gubernatorial race results forms available online range from 62 to 97%, depending on the state. A notable change if compared to the 25th of February election, when more than a quarter of presidential result forms were still missing at the declaration of the results on the 1st of March. Some 11,000 candidates competed in the state elections, among whom only a bare 10% were women. Notably, lead political parties fielded only 2 female candidates for highly prized governor seats. It demonstrates a clear underrepresentation of women in political life. Most importantly, it also shows the lack of internal party policies to support and promote inclusion of women. And let me also remind you that it is almost 40 years since Nigeria signed up to the United Nations Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and in so doing committed to eradicate discrimination against women in political life. Before I share our assessment of the campaign environment, let me stress that intra-party conflicts compounded by protracted deadlines for candidacy disputes created wholesale uncertainty for voters and electoral contestants alike. We observed that some court decisions about the electoral contestants were taken only a few days before the poll. Such timelines effectively reduce candidates' prospects to meaningfully campaign. Overall, campaigns in the state elections were highly competitive. Fundamental freedoms of assembly and movement were largely respected. However, the latter was impeded in some states by insecurity and executive actions. Further, organized violent attacks shortly before the polls led to a fearful atmosphere in some parts of the country. The campaign also saw many defections and individual switching supports from one party to another. Our observers noted that in several states, the abuse of incumbency gave an undue advantage to the party in power and limited the free expression of the will of the voter. Positively, voters in 15 out of 28 states benefited from professionally organized media debates, during which journalists questioned lead gubernatorial candidates on issues of local concern, while fact-checkers probed their responses for accuracy. It helped voters to make a better informed choice on election day, even if most incumbents rebuffed media offers. Unfortunately, attacks and harassment of journalists that occurred on the 25th of February went unprosecuted. I would hope that those who assault journalists, as well as those who perpetrated such attacks during this Saturday's polls, will be brought to justice. Our social media monitoring showed that gubernatorial candidates' online communication was focused on issues, a positive change from the presidential contest. However, disinformation contaminated online information space and aimed to confuse voters. We also recorded some dangerous rhetoric seeking to sow ethnic division. Positively, fact-checking initiatives continue to debunk such content and strive to preserve the integrity of the online space. Last but not least, I would like to commend the efforts of civil society organizations. Between the elections, national observer groups raised awareness and provided important electoral information to voters. Their leadership actively participated in online and offline discussions, calling for greater transparency and accountability of INEC ahead of the state elections. As I mentioned earlier, the collation process is still ongoing, and the EU Election Observation Mission is continuing its observation of this crucial phase of the election. Therefore, I encourage stakeholders to keep committed to a peaceful process and address any grievances through the courts. In this regard, I am mindful of the fact that various aspects of the presidential election have already been brought before the courts. I understand that petitions may also be submitted regarding several Senate and House of Representatives elections. That being said, it is important that this mission maintains its strict line of impartiality and non-interference in accordance with our observation methodology. Accordingly, I do not propose to discuss matters related to those elections as they are now likely to be sub judice. This is to avoid saying anything that might be construed as to prejudice the interests of any party in those petitions. As observers, we always hope to see a frictionless electoral process, to see democracy striving. Unfortunately, wide expectations that the new electoral law, in particular, would notably improve the overall conduct of the polls were not met, due in part to the poor implementation of the law and lack of political will to achieve its objectives. The conduct of the 2023 elections revealed systemic weaknesses of election administration that, if not properly and comprehensively addressed, could lead to democratic backsliding. This can have costly consequences for any country on any continent. Considering the pivotal role Nigeria has for this region, for Africa and the world, this is particularly important at this time. And thank you very much for your attention, and back to Alex.
Thank you very much, Chief Observer. So now we are opening the floor for questions from the media. If you have any question, please wait for the microphone and introduce yourself and the media you're representing. I don't see any hands up. Oh yeah, we get this gentleman here. Side of us.
Please permit me to sit down because of the cameras behind. So my name is Frank Gregory. I'm a reporter with Chinese TV. I would like to ask one question. I know that in September, before the commencement of the election, the EU promised that the mission will be pledging over 30 million euros for the conduct of credible elections in Nigeria. The presidential and National Assembly election is gone. The governorship and state assembly election is winding down. I would like to ask, from what you have observed so far, are you getting value for your money? The money you spend for this process? I would like to ask that. The second question, what will the EU be doing for those who so far are supported also, who are caused some infractions on the electoral process? At the end of the day, what will you be doing as a penalty to them? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's important at this point to draw a distinction between this mission and the European Union delegation. So We do represent the European Union together, but we are two separate entities. So the European Union mission is here since early January, and our core team, some of whom you see here this afternoon, will be here until April the 11th, and we will complete our reporting process within 3 months after today. And we will provide a final report with conclusions and recommendations. What you were describing in terms of EU investment in the democratic and governance process here in Nigeria is outside of our mandate. Nevertheless, it is important for us to be impactful and that the work we do is useful for Nigerians in particular. And in our engagement with political participants, but also especially with CSOs, civil society organizations, we have been reminded that the European Union's reports arising from these electoral processes have value and meaning. And we also carried out a follow-up mission from the last presidential elections in 2019, just a year ago, and we were able to identify progress that was made against some of the recommendations from 2019. So naturally there is some disappointment about the events over the last 3 or 4 weeks, but we will commit fully. This is why we have such a team of experts, why we're here for the long haul, why we've been here throughout the process, not just for election days itself, because we are committed to Nigerian democracy on behalf of the people of Nigeria. In relation to the infractions that you mentioned, again, I'm sorry to say that it's outside of our mandate to talk about the way in which investigations should take place or prosecutions should follow, indeed convictions. These are a matter for the criminal authorities. And as I mentioned before, we would encourage anybody with a grievance or who has evidence in relation to a grievance to share that with the appropriate legal authorities and to pursue those grievances in the appropriate legal channels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next question, please. This gentleman here.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Anul Emmanuel. I write for AFP World News Agency. I just want to find out from you. There have been reported cases of death, arising from individuals who tried during this period to disrupt elections. Some of them were killed by security agencies, and some apparently maybe in the process of conflict engagements, like attacks. I just want to find out from you if you have a record of these numbers across the country since you have observers nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, and I did try to draw attention to this fact. It's far more than a detail. It's absolutely tragic that 21 people, according to our latest information, lost their lives in election-related violence, and that's really unacceptable, and we want to pass our condolences to the families of those who lost their lives. And again, I would emphasize that if anybody has information relating to these incidents, that they should share it with appropriate legal authorities. And by any standards, when this kind of activity happens in the context of an election, it is almost inevitable that it has the effect of suppressing voter participation. And unfortunately, that is something that was very clearly seen on Saturday, where the high level of violence unfortunately had that effect. And these are standards of voter participation that are central to Nigeria's commitments in its own legislation and the international covenants that it's already signed up to. So we are saddened to share that information with you, but unfortunately that is the reality.
Thank you so much. Next question from the gentleman on left.
A very good afternoon to everybody. My name is Barry, I'm the Chief Reporter. My name is Ochako. I write for People Daily Newspaper. You said there is more deployment of technology in this election. Are you worried about that some states' gubernatorial elections have not been announced because of accusation that BVAS was not used in the conduct of the election? And I would ask you, sir, please, would you say that there is an improvement in this election compared with presidential election? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. I would say, I think we all know that it falls to INEC and INEC only to declare the results of the elections that took place on Saturday. And I am aware, we have taken note of the fact that in some individual states that there are ongoing issues and that INEC has made particular findings about that. And we will continue to monitor that process. As I mentioned to you in my opening remarks, we have long-term observers still in the field, in some cases still in collation centres where the results have not yet been announced. And we've also taken note of the fact that there has been problems with the BVAS, the operation of BVAS in some areas. But again, it's too soon to draw any conclusions about the pattern in this regard. We will have to wait until such time as we are in a position to issue a final report on that. Your other question, oh yes, I beg your pardon, yeah. So the question was about a comparison with the presidential elections. And as I mentioned before, there was an improvement in the operation of the technology. We saw not only the operation of the technology, but the overall functioning of the election from the opening of the polling units. Most of our observers noted that the polling units opened on time. Most of them observed that the rules were observed faithfully. But there were some issues, particularly around the secrecy of the casting of ballots, noted by many of our observers in polling units across the states. And this is an area, obviously, for improvement. But the most notable improvement was in the operation of the results viewing platform, where the promise of real-time opportunity to see the uploading of results was fulfilled in most cases. So there certainly was an improvement, but I would also add that there was a much lower turnout, which put less pressure on the electoral infrastructure that was operated on Saturday compared to the presidential.
Thank you so much. Now we take a question from the back of the room.
Good afternoon. My name is Sadia Tusu from African Independent Television. Okay, now the election so far for the governorship election, so that there was issues of thuggery and violence in some parts of the state. The EUPM has been observing elections for quite some time now. Does it mean that your recommendations were not adopted after the past elections? My second question is, those that are disrupting the democratic processes in Nigeria, what will be their punishment after this election? Thank you.
What will be the punishment of what?
Thank you very much. As I mentioned before, our election observation mission follows a very specific methodology, and this is the 7th election since the restoration of democracy in 1999 that the European Union has covered. And you're right to say that there has been widespread evidence of thuggery and of intimidation and political violence during the course of the elections that took place on Saturday. This doesn't in any way undermine our commitment as a mission to deepening the roots of democracy in Africa. We'll never turn our back on that mission. And we are honoured to be here at the invitation of INEC, and with the cooperation of all of the authorities, and with the enthusiasm, by the way, of civil society and political participants. We will never turn our back on that mission. We take that very seriously. I did refer in my opening comments to the danger of democratic backsliding, and I think that is something that all of us want to avoid seeing happening. But if we were to simply pull up our tent and walk away I think that's not something anybody would like to see us do. So we are committed for this, not only for this mission, but for the future, and we will continue to work towards those ends. Thank you.
Thanks, please. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Chiamaka Okafo. I work for Premium Time. From your last preliminary report press briefing, you spoke a lot about challenges around the process entirely. And you've done so again this afternoon in your report, although highlighting a few merits. I would like to ask you to speak directly to the merits you see in the process so far, and also if you think that the numerous challenges outlined should amount to cancellation of the election so far.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is important to emphasize the positives. We're not here to just identify negatives. And I would also like to say that when we do provide criticism, I think it's accepted by all parties as in the spirit in which it's given, which is constructive in every possible way. However, those positives we identified in my opening remarks. I think the technology worked better. I think that there was much better focus on issues as opposed to party disputes, which was a characteristic of the presidential election that we drew attention to. We think that the social media debate was well moderated in terms of trying to identify disinformation and fact-checking. And there was, we thought, movement and assembly of candidates was, broadly speaking, very positive, and we want to draw attention to that. It's really important that we emphasize those things. But nevertheless, we don't want to simply sugarcoat some other difficult truths because we wouldn't be doing ourselves justice, and certainly we wouldn't be doing justice to the people of Nigeria who have such a very obvious appetite for democracy in this country.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Georgina. I'm the person I report for Arise News. You made mention of several issues, and I took particular attention to your statement. Systematic weakness of the electoral process, if not addressed, could result in democratic backsliding. Now, going forward, what would you say the government of Nigeria and the electoral body should put together to address this democratic backsliding, as you put it? Because, of course, we do not want to go back to the military era. We want to continue this democratic process. Yes, we have our issues, but what would you highlight as factors that the electoral body should put together to address this?
This place can save you a lot of money. A lot of money. So right now, I'm about to take you guys inside the
electoral body should put together to address this, as well as the government. Remember, we saw ethnic sentiments being whipped up in certain states in the country, and Nigeria is one state, one country rather, and we would want to remain as one. Thank you.
Well, thank you for drawing attention to that comment at the end of my speech. And it is a worry, and it's, by the way, it's unfortunately something that's happening across the world. So we have to take this very seriously. All of those of us who are dedicated to democracy and aren't complacent about it, it's important that we identify shortcomings when they happen and have honest and robust conversations about it when we fall short of the standards that we set ourselves. And we will make conclusions and recommendations in due course. But I don't want to avoid your question. I think it's important that I remind you that when we do these missions, we try to test the process against the criteria that are internationally accepted, particularly inclusivity and transparency. And unfortunately, some of the technology, particularly the presidential, was not adequate to its intentions and objectives, and this offended against the principles of transparency. And also the security problems that were experienced on Saturday make it very difficult for people to participate in these elections, and therefore reduces inclusivity and the capacity of people to exercise their democratic right to choose the government, and disenfranchises so many people. So I would draw attention to those two factors. But as I said, this is a preliminary report that we're sharing with you today, and we will continue our work over the next few months before we conclude with a final report. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead here.
Good afternoon. My name is Maureen Cole from the University of Nigeria. The objective of the European Union Observation Mission is to observe basically and advise. So in the case where you observe and advise as a Nigerian government to adhere to some of the observations you see in the process, and such is not captured or reflected in the election year, what do you do?
Well, that's what I mentioned earlier was that arising from the 2019 election, we made a final report which contained 30 recommendations, which is out there in the public domain from 2019. And last year we had an election follow-up mission in March of 2022. We used that follow-up mission to essentially x-ray those recommendations and see which one of them were implemented or partially implemented. And we concluded that 13 of them were implemented or partially implemented, and where they weren't implemented, attempts had been made unsuccessfully in some cases to implement. For example, on improving the number of women participating in election. We know that bills in that regard didn't succeed in the Houses of the Assembly, so that's the limit of what we can do as a mission. We can only present this information, but I think we are very thorough about this, and we do follow up, and we do concern ourselves with impact. We don't want to waste your time, we don't want to waste the time of the Nigerian people with this engagement. And this methodology has, is tried and trusted, and it has survived the test of time and has added value in many countries across the world. And I think we really hope to see that the same here in Nigeria.
Thank you so much. For the last question, please. Jake.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I took time to listen to the very succinct presentation, and I did hear your comment about the inclusion of women, which is a good thing, but I don't think I heard about the inclusion of persons with disability, and I know that you did mention that in the first report from the presidential election. Did you monitor inclusion of persons with disability in this particular process, knowing fully well that we had 34 persons who contested various levels of election, and I'm glad that at least one person won as a governor. Did you monitor that process? Thank you.
Yes, indeed we did, and thanks for drawing attention to the fact that we covered this in the first preliminary statement, and we also covered it in this preliminary statement, which you see on page 9 of the report, where we note that CSOs in several states expressed a high level of dissatisfaction with efforts at inclusivity, and ahead of the poll on Saturday, we noted limited evidence of efforts to enhance participation of persons with disability. They were able to, as you know, participate in trainings for ad hoc staff. Very few were actually selected to serve. So Again, it will feed into the overall conclusions and recommendations, and with your cooperation, we will continue to consult with your organizations as we come to the final report. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe we answered all the questions from the media, and then with this we're going to conclude this press conference. As our chief observer mentioned, please remember that the mission will return to Nigeria, and now it's continuing its activities, observing the process until the very end. Then the mission will return in about approximately 2 months after this time. It will present its comprehensive final report, which will include its detailed findings of the entire electoral process and recommendations for future elections and for the issues identified. You can find our preliminary statement and press release, an official printed copy, on your way out at our reception desk and also on our website. So once again, thank you very much for your interest in our press conference and in our findings. And the press conference ends now.
Thank you. Thanks, Agnes.
Was it okay?
Yeah, so it's great.
Companies of all sizes use BigQuery to uncover new insights from their data, like cost.
Hello guys, thank you for watching the video. Please like, subscribe to my YouTube channel Steven TV 06, and also follow my Facebook page Steven TV. Thank you guys. Like, comment, share to your friends guys. Thank you guys.